Phoebe Beall, and tonight I am filling in for Stephen Colbert. Nation, tonight our issue is the death penalty. In North Carolina, SB 9, a bill to reinforce the strength of the capital punishment, was recently vetoed. It has a short, concise title, namely, An Act to Reform the Racial Justice Act of 2009 to be consistent with the United States Supreme Court's ruling in McCleskey v. Kemp. So I guess we don't need to know anything else about that, right? Well, long story short, it's trying to make sure people can't assert that race plays a role in their punishment. It's trying to overturn the Racial Justice Act, which is attempting to allow statistics about racial injustice to be used in the punishment system. Of course, why should we use facts that help demystify the fairness of our justice system? We should ignore the inequality of the criminal justice process, from the stopping and frisking of people of color to much bigger percentage of black criminals than with a white victim being given the death penalty. We should follow the discourse that only the most horrible people in our nation get put behind bars or even executed. The prison industrial complex becomes the least of your worries when it's a life or death situation. But, like I said earlier, the law was vetoed by North Carolina Governor Beth Perdue, but fear not, nation. Supporters are already planning on proposing another law that will have a similar effect to SB 9. And today we are lucky to be joined by one of the proposers herself. Here is Julia Zeigler. Well, Julia, thank you so much for being here today. Now, you have introduced this law about the death penalty. Tell me, why do you feel this is such an important issue?
Well, I feel the idea of this law is to make a more just society, and when we are dealing with human lives, it is important that we make it as just as we can.
Yes, indeed, a just society that makes sure only those who have the racial odds stacked against them will be put to death.
Well, no, that is not what this law does. This law makes it so that we do not put too much emphasis on the racial statistics. McCleskey v. Kemp, the landmark Supreme Court case, specifically ruled against statistics in death penalty cases. It said that these are unconstitutional.
So, what motivated you to introduce this law in the first place?
Well, there are sometimes reasons that the death penalty needs to be used. Some crimes are really so horrible the death penalty is the only thing that's fair. The Racial Justice Act was basically a moratorium on the death penalty that stopped it from being used. That's all supporters of it wanted, to stop it from being used.
Well, what would you say about Cheryl Harris's notion that whiteness is a form of property that African Americans cannot attain because of the institutionalized racism, such as the death penalty, much more likely to be given to someone who is black?
Well, you can say that the death penalty is more likely to be given to blacks, but what about the idea that maybe our law system is fair and just as it is, and African Americans are simply doing more crimes that enlist the death penalty as punishment? I believe that people should get punishment for what they do.
Well, I would say in response to that, Colbert would argue that racial ideals and motives are tied to the way the state is governed. Indeed, we can even tie some of the aspects of the death penalty back to the mob days of lynching. And I think Goldberg would also say that we can ameliorate the racial state by adding protections to people who are being discriminated against, allowing inmates to appeal the death penalty based on race, for instance, with the Racial Justice Act, would maybe be a needed thing to balance this racialized state.
Well, the justice system needs to be fair and equal for everyone, and that doesn't mean giving some people special privileges, regardless of race or the institutionalized racism that supposedly infiltrates the law.
Well, I think that's about all we have time for. Thank you so much, Julia. Here we have Julia's Law. Everyone go out and get a copy of this right here, and thank you so much for being on the program tonight, Julia. And we'll be right back after this.